My parents skipped my college graduation to fund my brother's doomed business, calling my engineering degree completely pointless. So, when a massive tech giant handed me millions, I planned a celebratory dinner that would permanently cut them out. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was shivering violently, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that smelled faintly of the damp mildew creeping up the walls of my tiny basement apartment. A severe flu had been ravaging my body for 3 days, a physical manifestation of the absolute exhaustion that had built up over 4 grueling years of my advanced robotics engineering program. I had worked 3 jobs to pay for tuition, lived on instant ramen, and slept an average of 4 hours a night. Tomorrow was graduation day. It was supposed to be the moment all the suffering finally meant something. My graduation gown hung on the back of my closet door, a crisp, black beacon of hope in a room otherwise filled with textbooks, loose wiring, and discarded circuit boards. I was staring at it, trying to muster the energy to iron the wrinkles out of the sleeves, when my phone vibrated against the chipped wood of my nightstand. The caller ID flashed my mother's name, Elena. I cleared my throat, trying to push the raspiness of the sickness away, and answered. "Hey, Mom, are you and Dad on the road yet? I know the weather is a little rough, so drive safe. I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow." There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of clinking glasses and upbeat music in the background. It didn't sound like the interior of their old sedan. "Ava, honey," Elena began, her voice carrying that distinct, overly sweet tone she always used right before delivering terrible news. "We aren't going to be able to make it to the ceremony tomorrow." My heart plummeted into my stomach, the nausea from my flu suddenly intensifying tenfold. "What? What do you mean you aren't going to make it?" "The drive is only 4 hours. Is the car broken down? I can wire you the money for a rental. I have a little bit saved." "No, Ava, it's not the car," she interrupted, her sigh loud and sharp. "It's your brother. Leo is hosting the official launch party for his new startup tomorrow night. He's rented out a gallery downtown, and he needs us there for moral support. You know how stressful the venture capital world is for him." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, my vision blurred with hot, angry tears. "Mom, you promised. You and Dad promised you would be here. I'm graduating at the top of my class. I spent the last 4 years killing myself to get this degree without asking you for a single dime. Leo has a launch party every 6 months, and his businesses never even make it off the ground." "Do not speak about your brother's ambitions that way," Elena snapped, her tone instantly hardening into ice. "Leo is an entrepreneur. He is building something from the ground up. He needs our financial and emotional backing to secure his future." "And what about my future?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "What about my graduation?" "Ava, please," my father, Richard, yelled from somewhere in the background, clearly having taken the phone from my mother. "Let's be realistic here. You're getting a piece of paper. It's just a degree. Honestly, all this robotics nonsense is completely pointless compared to Leo's potential. He's going to be the CEO of a major company. You'll probably just be working in a lab somewhere. We spent the travel money and your graduation gift fund to help him secure the catering for the event. Be a supportive sister for once." The dial tone echoed in my ear before I could even formulate a response. They had hung up. The silence in my freezing apartment was deafening. I looked back at the black gown hanging on the door, the symbol of my blood, sweat, and tears. My own parents had just dismissed the greatest achievement of my life as pointless to fund another one of my brother's delusions. As I collapsed back onto my mattress, coughing until my ribs ached, a cold, hardening realization washed over me. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The immediate aftermath of that phone call was a blur of physical agony and emotional devastation. I spent the next several hours curled in a fetal position on the floor of my apartment, unable to move, unable to breathe without a sharp pain piercing my chest. I felt entirely hollowed out. Every sacrifice I had ever made flashed before my eyes. The times I had skipped meals so I could afford lab fees. The nights I had walked 3 miles home in the freezing snow because I couldn't afford a bus fare. All of it dismissed in a 2-minute phone call. By the time evening rolled around, the apartment had grown entirely dark. I hadn't bothered to turn on a single lamp. I just lay there in the shadows, staring blankly at the ceiling. Then, the phone rang again. For a brief, pathetic second, a spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe they felt guilty. Maybe they had changed their minds and were packing the car. I reached for the phone, not bothering to check the caller ID in the dark, and pressed it to my ear. "Hey, little sister," Leo's overly confident, smarmy voice filtered through the speaker. He sounded out of breath, likely pacing around whatever overpriced venue our parents had just paid for. "Mom said you were throwing a bit of a tantrum about tomorrow. Listen, I need you to get over it." "Leo, I am sick. I am exhausted. Please just leave me alone," I croaked, barely recognizing my own voice. I will, just listen," he pressed on, completely ignoring my distress. The web developer for my launch totally flaked. He locked me out of the domain because of some stupid dispute over a final invoice. "Since you're just sitting around tomorrow doing your little commencement walk, I need you to hack into the backend and reset the launch timers. You're good with all that computer nerd stuff, right? I need it done by 6 p.m. I slowly sat up, my head swimming with dizziness. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to use me. "You want me to steal back a website you clearly didn't pay for on the day of my college graduation?" "Oh, come on, Ava. Don't be so dramatic," Leo scoffed, the sound of ice clinking in a glass echoing on his end. "Mom and Dad told you my business is the priority right now. They believe in my vision. They know where the real success in this family is going to come from. Just do this one favor for me. Think of it as your graduation gift to me." "I'm not doing anything for you, Leo," I said quietly, the anger finally burning away the edges of my fever. "Enjoy your party." I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the floor. I slowly pushed myself up from the mattress, my legs trembling beneath me. I walked over to my cramped, cluttered desk and turned on the small, pivoting lamp. The yellow light washed over the piles of research papers, schematics, and empty coffee cups. But right in the center, carefully placed on top of a clean notebook, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It had arrived 2 days ago via private courier. Inside was a formal offer letter from a $10 billion tech giant, a company that had been quietly observing my undergraduate research in autonomous robotic systems for the last year. They weren't just offering me a job, they were offering me a directorial position in their advanced research division, complete with a massive, life-changing signing bonus that was already processing into my checking account. My degree wasn't pointless. It was the key to an empire. I traced my fingers over the embossed logo on the heavy paper, a slow, determined smile finally breaking through my tears. They thought I was nothing. They thought my brother was the future. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. The roots of my family's delusion ran deep, spanning all the way back to our childhood. Growing up, the dynamic was clear and unbending. Leo was the sun, and the rest of us were simply expected to orbit around him, providing warmth, money, and endless praise. My parents, Elena and Richard, were hardworking people. My mother a retired middle school teacher, and my father a manager at a local hardware store. They had built a comfortable, modest life, but they harbored a desperate, glaring desire for wealth and status. And they had arbitrarily decided early on that Leo, with his loud voice and unearned confidence, was their golden ticket. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, studious daughter. I won science fairs, secured academic scholarships, and spent my weekends building circuit boards in the garage. My achievements were met with polite nods, while Leo's basic participation trophies were treated like Olympic gold medals. This toxic cycle only worsened as we entered adulthood. While I took on crippling debt and multiple minimum wage jobs to fund my education, Leo became an entrepreneur. It was a title he wielded like a shield against actual labor. He never held a standard job for more than a month. Instead, he constantly pitched elaborate, buzzword-filled startups that required massive influxes of cash. First, it was a revolutionary app that promised to disrupt the food delivery market, which crashed and burned after 6 months, taking my parents' savings account with it. Next, it was a line of luxury imported fitness equipment that turned out to be cheap plastic junk, leaving my parents to cover the massive wholesale invoices. Yet, no matter how many times Leo failed, my parents always blamed the market, or his partners, or simply bad luck. They never blamed Leo. He was incredibly adept at playing them. I vividly remember a family dinner a year ago. Leo had arrived wearing a tailored, three-piece suit that cost more than my entire semester's tuition. His hair was perfectly slicked back, and he wore a heavy, expensive watch that he made sure to flash every time he reached for a dinner roll. "The landscape is shifting," Leo had announced that night, swirling a glass of wine my father had paid for. "Venture capitalists are looking for visionaries. The old ways of working a 9 to 5 are dead, Dad. You need leverage. You need assets working for you." He spoke in empty corporate jargon, throwing around words like synergy and scalability, without ever actually explaining what his new company produced. I had sat across from him, exhausted from a 12-hour shift at a diner, watching him systematically manipulate our parents. "That's exactly why I was looking at the equity in your house," Leo had continued, leaning forward with a predatory gleam in his eye. "If we remortgage, just pull a little equity out, I can guarantee a 300% return on this new crypto platform I'm developing. It's a sure thing, Mom. Think about your retirement. Don't you want to retire on a yacht instead of in this dusty old suburb?" I had spoken up, begging them not to risk their home, warning them that his plan sounded like a pyramid scheme. My parents had instantly turned on me, accusing me of being jealous of my brother's drive. 3 weeks later, they signed the papers for the second mortgage. Leo was not just a failure, he was a parasite. He had a vague profession, but a very specific skill, extracting every last drop of financial and emotional resource from our parents. He had no boundaries, no shame, and an inappropriate, relentless interest in whatever assets our family had left. As I sat at my desk, looking at the multi-million-dollar offer letter in front of me, the picture became crystal clear. If they knew about this money, if they knew what I had actually achieved, Leo wouldn't hesitate to turn his predatory focus onto me. And my parents would happily help him drain my accounts dry in the name of his potential. I folded the heavy letter and placed it carefully into a hidden compartment in my desk drawer. Let them have their launch party. Let them have their delusions. I was going to graduate in silence, start my new life in secret, and wait for the inevitable collapse. The next morning, I walked across the stage of the university auditorium entirely alone. The sprawling venue was packed with thousands of cheering families, holding up colorful signs, blowing air horns, and crying tears of joy as their children's names echoed over the loudspeaker. When the dean called Ava, summa cum laude, advanced robotics engineering, there was only a polite, scattered smattering of applause from strangers. I looked out into the sea of faces, scanning the middle rows where my parents had originally promised to sit. The seats were occupied by a family holding a bouquet of bright yellow sunflowers for someone else. I took my diploma, smiled a tight, practiced smile for the university photographer, and walked off the stage. I didn't stay for the reception. I didn't take pictures by the campus fountain. I just walked back to my freezing basement apartment, packed my meager belongings into 3 cardboard boxes, and prepared to leave my old life behind. 2 weeks later, the contrast could not have been more staggering. I traded my damp, mildew-scented basement for a sprawling, glass-walled office on the 42nd floor of the tech giant's downtown headquarters. I had my own dedicated laboratory, a team of junior researchers at my disposal, and a bank account balance that looked like a typographical error. My signing bonus had cleared, instantly wiping out my student debt and leaving me with more capital than my parents had earned in their entire lifetimes. But the lingering sting of my parents' betrayal gnawed at me. I knew it was only a matter of time before Leo's grand launch party proved to be the disaster I expected, and once the dust settled and the creditors came knocking, they would come looking for me. I needed to be prepared. I needed to shift from being the passive, compliant daughter they could ignore into an active, impenetrable fortress. I decided to utilize my new resources. Through a discreet referral from my company's corporate security division, I hired a private investigator and forensic accountant named Marcus. Marcus was a former federal auditor, a man who spoke very little but possessed a terrifying ability to track a single penny through a labyrinth of shell companies. We met in a high-end, exceptionally quiet coffee shop near my office. I slid across a manila folder containing the few details I had about Leo's LLC, the dates of my parents' second mortgage, and the names of his previous business partners. I need to know exactly what my brother is doing with my parents' money, I told Marcus, wrapping my hands around a warm mug of tea. I need to know the structure of his current venture, and I need to know his liabilities. They are going to drag my parents down with them, and I need a shield. Marcus adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the folder. He didn't ask questions about family dynamics or my motivations, he merely looked at the data. "Give me 72 hours, he said quietly. It only took him 48. When Marcus called me back to his office, a windowless, heavily secured room lined with filing cabinets, he didn't mince words. He turned his computer monitor around to face me, revealing a web of brightly colored flowcharts connecting bank accounts, routing numbers, and offshore registrations. "Your brother doesn't have a startup," Marcus explained, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "He has an elaborate funnel. The investments your parents made, the equity from their home, the graduation fund they drained, it never went to software development or marketing. He used a fraction of it to rent a gallery and buy cheap catering to create the illusion of a launch. The rest of the funds were immediately transferred into a private, limited liability corporation registered in a tax haven, entirely under his own name." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding a heavy, rhythmic beat against my ribs. "What is he spending it on?" Marcus handed me a thick stack of printed bank statements. Luxury car leases, high-end restaurants, a 6-month retainer for a luxury penthouse apartment downtown. He is effectively using your parents' retirement as a personal checking account to fund the lifestyle of a successful CEO without actually running a company. But then Marcus pointed a pen at a specific line item. "Here is your leverage, Ava." In his haste to set up this shell game, he made a critical administrative error. To avoid certain commercial registration fees, he listed the primary legal address of his fraudulent LLC as your parents' residential home. And he listed you as the secondary emergency technical contact on the domain registry, likely because he intended to force you to manage the site for free. You have the access and the paper trail to freeze his entire operation. A cold, calculating calm washed over me. I wasn't just a disappointed daughter anymore. I was holding the keys to his entire fabricated empire. Exactly 1 month after graduation, my phone lit up with a text message from Alina. It was the first time she had reached out since she had hung up on me to go to Leo's party. "Hi, sweetie. We miss you. Dad and I were hoping we could all get together for a nice family lunch today. We have some things we need to discuss. Love you." The false sweetness of the message made my stomach churn. I knew exactly what "things we need to discuss" meant. Leo's money had run out. The penthouse rent was due. I agreed to meet them at a mid-tier Italian restaurant halfway between my new apartment and their house. I arrived early, wearing a tailored professional blazer that cost more than my old car, and sat at a large booth near the back. When they walked in, the physical toll of their financial stress was immediately apparent. My father looked 10 years older, the bags under his eyes dark and heavy. My mother's usually pristine hair was slightly disheveled, and trailing behind them, looking uncharacteristically jittery, was Leo. He was wearing the same expensive suit from a year ago, but it looked rumpled, as if he hadn't taken it to the dry cleaners in weeks. "Ava." Elena forced a bright, fragile smile, rushing over to slide into the booth across from me. "Look at you. You look different, very professional." "Thank you, Mom," I said smoothly, not offering a hug. My father cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze entirely as he picked up a menu. So, Ava, you graduated. Congratulations. Are you, looking for lab work, finding anything? Before I could answer, Leo slammed his hands down on the table, unable to contain his impatience. Look, we don't have time for small talk. Ava, I'm in a slight bind. My investors are restructuring their portfolios, and they've temporarily frozen my Series A funding round. It's a standard bureaucratic delay, completely normal in the tech space. But I have some immediate overhead costs. Mom and Dad are totally tapped out right now because of some unexpected bank fees. I need you to take out a personal loan. $10,000 should cover it. You have a clean credit history since you never bought a house or anything. I'll pay you back double in a month. He said it with such casual entitlement that I actually let out a short, sharp laugh. The sound startled them. A personal loan. I repeated, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. For your overhead costs. Yes, Leo snapped, his face flushing with irritation. It's a temporary liquidity issue. You wouldn't understand the complexities of it. You're right, Leo, I said softly, reaching into my leather briefcase resting on the seat beside me. I don't understand the complexities of it. Which is why I had someone look into it for me. I pulled out the first document Marcus had prepared, a heavily highlighted bank statement, and slid it across the table toward my parents. What is this? My father asked, squinting at the paper. That is a statement from Leo's corporate account, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. You'll notice the deposit at the top, the $50,000 you gave him from the second mortgage. Now, look at the withdrawals. Elena traced her finger down the paper, her brow furrowing. A down payment on a sports car, flights to a resort, $5,000 at a boutique watch store. Leo, what is this? Leo snatched the paper from her hands, his eyes widening in a mixture of panic and rage. Where did you get this? This is confidential corporate data. You hacked me, you little freak. I didn't hack anything, Leo, I replied evenly. You left a paper trail a mile wide. You didn't spend a single dime of their money on a business. You spent it on yourself. The launch party was a cover to drain their retirement. You don't understand business. Leo shouted, slamming his fist on the table so hard the water glasses rattled, drawing the attention of several nearby tables. This is networking. You have to look the part to secure the big fish. You're just a bitter, jealous little lab rat. I'll sue you for defamation. I'll ruin whatever pathetic career you're trying to build. Leo, please calm down, people are staring. Elena whispered frantically, placing a trembling hand on his arm. Then she looked at me, her eyes defensive. Ava, I'm sure there is an explanation. Leo is an innovator. Sometimes innovators have unconventional expenses. I stared at her, utterly bewildered by the depth of her denial. I had placed the proof of his theft right in front of her, and she was still shielding him. There is no explanation, Mom, I said, standing up from the booth. He's bankrupting you, and I will not give him a single cent. I dropped a $50 bill on the table to cover the coffees we hadn't ordered yet, and walked out, leaving Leo sputtering wildly and my parents staring blankly at the statement. The fallout from the restaurant was immediate and volatile. Over the next 48 hours, my phone was bombarded with a relentless barrage of unhinged voicemails from Leo. He swung wildly between pathetic pleading and vicious threats. You think you're so smart, Ava. You think you can just march in and ruin my life with fake documents. I have lawyers on retainer. I will drag you through court until you are begging on the street. Call me back right now. Ava, please, you have to understand the pressure is immense, the stress of being a founder. I made some miscalculations. Just wire me $5,000. If you don't, I lose the apartment. Please, sister to brother. I didn't respond to a single one. I simply forwarded the audio files directly to Marcus. While Leo was spiraling into desperation, my investigation was unearthing the darkest, most terrifying layer of his deception. Marcus called me in for an emergency meeting late on a Thursday evening. When I walked into his office, the forensic accountant looked uncharacteristically grim. The car leases and the luxury watches were just the tip of the iceberg, Ava, Marcus said, motioning for me to sit down. He pushed a new, significantly thicker folder across the desk. When your brother realized the mortgage money wasn't going to cover his escalating lifestyle, he didn't stop spending. He went looking for new lines of credit. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of 3 different high-yield, short-term personal loan applications. They were the kind of predatory loans that came with suffocating interest rates. "Look at the signatures," Marcus instructed. I flipped to the signature pages. My breath caught in my throat. The signatures read Alina and Richard, but the handwriting was entirely wrong. It was cramped, hurried, and unmistakably Leo's handwriting trying to mimic our mother's flowing script. "He didn't just waste their money," I whispered, the reality of the situation crashing over me like freezing water. "He committed identity theft. He forged their signatures." "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "He took out nearly $70,000 in their names, entirely without their knowledge. And because the LLC is registered to their home address, when these loans default, which they are scheduled to do in less than 14 days, the creditors are going to place a lien on your parents' house. They will lose everything." This was no longer a matter of entitlement or family favoritism. This was a severe, prosecutable felony. My brother was actively destroying my parents' lives, and they were still defending him. The next morning, while I was sitting at my desk reviewing schematics for a new robotic articulation joint, my office phone rang. It was my father. "Ava," his voice was incredibly weary, strained thin by exhaustion. "Your mother hasn't slept in 2 days. Leo is a wreck. He says you fabricated those bank statements to sabotage him. Look, I don't know what's going on, but you need to apologize to your brother. He is under a lot of stress, and your jealousy isn't helping." "Dad, I am not jealous of Leo," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "I need you and Mom to get on a video call with me right now. No, do not interrupt me. Go to your computer, sit down together, and call me. If you don't do this right now, you are going to lose the house." The sheer authority in my voice must have stunned him, because 10 minutes later, my computer screen chimed with an incoming video call. My parents appeared on the monitor, sitting side by side in their living room, looking incredibly small and defensive. Leo was pacing back and forth behind them, glaring at the camera. "What is this about, Ava?" Alina demanded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Leo is very busy." "I know exactly how busy he is," I said. I didn't waste time with a preamble. I shared my screen directly to their monitor, pulling up the high-resolution scans of the forged loan documents. "Look at the screen," I ordered. "These are 3 separate, high-interest personal loans totaling $70,000. Look at the signatures at the bottom." My parents leaned forward, squinting at the screen. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I watched the color drain completely from my mother's face. My father's jaw dropped open. I never signed this," my father stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "Alina, did you?" "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She turned slowly to look over her shoulder at her golden child. "Leo, what is this?" Leo stopped pacing. He stared at the screen, then at his parents, and for the first time in his life, he had absolutely nothing to say. He looked like a trapped animal. Instead of explaining, instead of apologizing, he lunged forward, reached over my father's shoulder, and violently slammed the laptop shut, instantly terminating the call and plunging my screen into darkness. The spell was finally breaking. I had given them the proof, but I knew Leo would try to spin it, to lie his way out of it in the privacy of their home. I couldn't let that happen. It was time to force the issue entirely out into the open, in a place where he couldn't hide, and they couldn't turn a blind eye. It was time to invite them to dinner. The silence following the terminated video call was the loudest I had ever experienced. It was the sound of a carefully constructed, decades-old delusion finally shattering into a million jagged pieces. I knew Leo would spend the next 24 hours doing damage control. He would cry, he would blame the bank, he would claim it was a misunderstanding, or that a rogue employee had filed the paperwork incorrectly. And my parents, terrified of the reality staring them in the face, might just be desperate enough to believe him. I could not allow that to happen. I needed to extinguish his influence completely, permanently, and publicly. I needed an audience. I spent the next 2 days meticulously organizing an event that would serve as the final stage for Leo's unmasking. I rented the private dining room of the Sovereign, the most exclusive, absurdly expensive restaurant in the financial district. The room featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, heavy mahogany tables, and crystal chandeliers that fractured the evening light into 1,000 shimmering prisms. I didn't just invite my parents and my brother. I cast a much wider net. I sent formal, gold-embossed invitations to Aunt Susan and Uncle David, the relatives my parents were constantly trying to impress. I invited Cousin Mark, who had always been quietly skeptical of Leo's business ventures. I even invited my father's older brother, Uncle Thomas, a retired judge who commanded absolute respect within the family hierarchy. The pretext of the dinner was carefully formulated to guarantee their attendance. The invitation read, "A celebration of success. Please join Ava to commemorate a major financial milestone and discuss the future of the family's investments." I knew exactly how Leo and my parents would interpret that. They would assume I had capitulated. They would assume the multi-million-dollar tech company had paid out my bonuses, that the pressure had broken me, and that I was summoning the family to publicly hand over a massive check to save Leo's startup and rescue my parents' home. Greed and desperation are powerful motivators. I knew they wouldn't miss it for the world. The evening of the dinner arrived with a heavy, impending sense of finality. I wore a sharp, tailored navy blue suit that projected unyielding authority. I arrived an hour early to coordinate with the waitstaff and place a thick, leather-bound folder at each of the 10-seat settings. At exactly 7 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. Aunt Susan and Uncle David were the first, buzzing with curiosity. Uncle Thomas arrived shortly after, looking stern but intrigued. Finally, the door opened, and my parents walked in, trailing behind Leo. Leo looked entirely revitalized. The panic from the video call was gone, replaced by a smug, triumphant aura. He was wearing a brand-new, impeccably tailored tuxedo, undoubtedly purchased with the last remaining dregs of his fraudulent credit lines. He strutted into the room like a conquering king, immediately shaking hands with Uncle Thomas and kissing Aunt Susan on the cheek. My parents, however, looked physically ill. My mother's eyes were darting nervously around the opulent room, and my father's hands were trembling slightly as he pulled out her chair. They had seen the forged signatures. They knew the cliff they were standing on, but they were still blindly hoping Leo would miraculously build a bridge to save them. "Ava, sweetheart." Aunt Susan beamed, taking her seat. "This place is magnificent. We were so thrilled to get your invitation. Your mother tells us you've landed quite the lucrative position, and that you're looking to, perhaps, invest in Leo's new company." I caught my mother's eye. She looked away instantly, her face flushing bright red. Leo smirked from across the table, leaning back in his chair and swirling a glass of sparkling water. "Well, Susan," Leo interrupted, his voice booming across the room. "Ava has finally realized that the real money isn't in sitting in a cubicle soldering wires. She sees the vision. She understands that family supports family. I've got a Series A funding round that's about to explode, and I'm generous enough to let my little sister get in on the ground floor." "Is that right, Ava?" Uncle Thomas asked, his sharp eyes evaluating me. "Not exactly, Uncle Thomas," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a blade. I remained seated, but my posture was perfectly rigid. "I invited you all here tonight to discuss the future of the family's finances, yes, because, as of right now, my parents are roughly 14 days away from losing their home." A collective gasp echoed around the table. Aunt Susan dropped her fork, the silver clattering loudly against the fine china. My father buried his face in his hands. "Ava, stop it right now," Elena hissed, her voice trembling with panic. "Do not do this in front of the family. We are handling it. Leo is handling it." "He isn't handling anything, Mom," I said smoothly. I gestured to the heavy leather folders sitting in front of every guest. "Please, everyone, open the folders." Hesitantly, Uncle Thomas reached forward and flipped open the cover. Aunt Susan and Uncle David followed suit. Inside, meticulously organized and flagged with colored tabs, was the entire forensic accounting report Marcus had compiled. "What you are looking at," I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent room, "is the complete financial reality of Leo's business empire. Turn to page 1. You will see the $50,000 my parents took out against the equity of their home. Now, look at the corresponding expenditures. A $50,000 second mortgage." Uncle David whispered, staring at my father in absolute shock. "Richard, what were you thinking?" "Keep reading," I instructed coldly. "You'll see that the money didn't go to software development or servers. It went to a luxury penthouse lease. It went to first-class flights to Cabo. It went to a private chef. My brother has been living the life of a billionaire CEO by draining the blood and sweat of our parents' retirement fund." "This is completely out of context," Leo shouted, jumping to his feet. The smugness had evaporated, replaced by a frenzied, wild-eyed panic. "These are fabricated. She's a hacker. She printed fake documents because she's jealous I'm the favorite." "Turn to page 4, I continued, completely ignoring his outburst. My eyes were locked on Uncle Thomas, the former judge, who was reading the documents with a terrifyingly blank expression. The sound of pages turning in unison was deafening. "On page 4, I said, my voice dropping an octave, "you will see 3 separate applications for high-yield, short-term personal loans. They total $70,000. They are taken out in the names of Richard and Alina." My mother let out a small, wounded whimper. "Look at the signatures," I commanded. Uncle Thomas leaned in, tracing the ink on the high-resolution scans. He looked up, his eyes burning with a cold, professional fury. "This isn't Alina's handwriting," he stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "This is a forgery. This is felony fraud." "He forged their signatures," I confirmed, finally turning my gaze to Leo, who was now gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles bone-white. "He committed identity theft against his own parents to fund his vanity. Those loans default in less than 2 weeks. When they do, the creditors will place a lien on the house, and my parents will be on the street." Chaos erupted. Aunt Susan began to cry hysterically. Uncle David stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor, and pointed a shaking finger at my father. "How could you let him do this, Richard? How could you be so blind?" "I didn't know." My father sobbed, the dam finally breaking. Tears streamed down his weathered face. "I swear to God, David, I didn't know about the loans. He told us he just needed a little help. He told us he was going to make us rich." "You stupid, ungrateful little brat," Leo screamed, completely losing his mind. He lunged across the table toward me, his face twisted in absolute rage, sending crystal glasses shattering onto the floor. "I am the visionary. You are nothing. I'll kill you for this." Before he could reach me, Uncle Thomas stood up. Despite his age, the retired judge possessed an intimidating physical presence. He grabbed Leo by the collar of his expensive tuxedo and shoved him violently back into his chair. "Sit down and shut your mouth, you pathetic excuse for a man," Uncle Thomas roared, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Leo shrank back, panting heavily, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He looked at my parents, playing his final, desperate card. "Mom, Dad. Tell them it's a lie. Tell them I had your permission. Please." The entire room turned to look at Alina and Richard. The silence was agonizing. My mother was shaking uncontrollably, tears ruining her makeup, her hands clutching her napkin like a lifeline. She looked at the forged signatures on the paper in front of her. She looked at the terrified, exposed man sitting across from her. And then, slowly, she looked at me. For the first time in my entire life, I saw the veil drop from her eyes. She didn't see a golden child anymore. She saw a predator. "No," my mother whispered. The word was incredibly soft, but it carried the weight of a collapsing mountain. "Mom, please," Leo begged, reaching a hand out toward her. "Do not touch me." Alina shrieked, recoiling from him as if he were covered in acid. She stood up, her chair falling backward. "You stole from us. You forged our names." We gave you everything. We gave you Ava's graduation money, we gave you our home, and you used it to buy watches and cars. You are a monster." My father stood beside her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. He looked at Leo, his eyes entirely devoid of the warmth and pride that had resided there for 24 years. "We are done, Leo," my father said, his voice hollow and broken. "You are not my son, not anymore." Leo sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently. The spell was broken. The golden pedestal had been smashed to dust. I remained seated, watching the destruction of the illusion I had spent my life suffering under. I felt no joy, no triumph. I only felt an overwhelming sense of closure. "There's one more thing," I said quietly into the heavy silence. "I didn't just invite you all to dinner." I reached into my blazer and pulled out my phone, tapping the screen once. The heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room swung open. 2 uniformed police officers walked in, followed by a man in a plain suit holding a leather briefcase, a detective from the state's Financial Crimes Division. "Leo," the detective said, his voice clipped and professional as he stepped into the room. "We have a warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Leo let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He didn't fight. All the arrogance, all the corporate jargon, all the false bravado vanished entirely. He stood up on trembling legs and allowed the officers to place the cold steel cuffs around his wrists. As they marched him out of the room, he didn't look back at my parents. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, a broken, empty shell of a man. The aftermath of that night was a grueling, agonizing process of untangling the massive knot Leo had created. True to his cowardly nature, Leo folded immediately under police interrogation. Faced with the irrefutable evidence Marcus had gathered, he confessed to everything in a desperate bid to secure a plea deal. It didn't save him. The sheer scale of his fraud, coupled with the interstate nature of his wire transfers, guaranteed a lengthy federal prison sentence. He was indicted, his assets, what little was left of them, were seized, and he was remanded to a county holding facility to await his trial. His social standing evaporated overnight. The investors and networkers he had spent my parents' money to impress blocked his number and pretended they had never met him. My parents, meanwhile, were left standing in the smoking ruins of their lives. The reality of their financial situation was dire, but the emotional devastation was catastrophic. They had worshipped a false idol, and the realization that they had actively neglected and abused their only loyal child in the process utterly broke them. A week after the dinner, they came to my office. They didn't ask to come up to the 42nd floor. They waited humbly in the ground floor lobby until I agreed to come down. They looked like ghosts of their former selves. We sat on a leather bench in the corner of the lobby. For a long time, no one spoke. "Ava," my father finally started, his voice cracking. He was staring at the marble floor. "There are no words. I know that 'I'm sorry' doesn't even begin to cover it. We were so blinded. We were so desperate for him to be something he wasn't that we completely ignored the incredible woman you were becoming. We failed you. In every possible way a parent can fail a child, we failed you." My mother was weeping silently, tears tracking down her pale cheeks. "I skipped your graduation," she whispered, her voice laced with a profound, agonizing regret. "You worked so hard for so many years and I called it pointless. I will never, ever forgive myself for that. I don't expect you to forgive us either. We needed to look you in the eye and tell you that we know what we did. We know we lost you." I looked at the two of them. The anger that had burned inside me for so long had finally burned itself out, leaving only a quiet, melancholy peace. "I hired a team of lawyers to handle the fraudulent loans," I told them calmly. "Because Leo forged your signatures, and because we acted quickly to report it to the authorities, the creditors cannot hold you liable for the $70,000. The debt has been transferred to Leo's criminal estate." My parents looked up, a spark of disbelief in their eyes. "As for the second mortgage," I continued, "I paid it off this morning. The lien on your house has been cleared. You are not going to lose your home." My mother covered her mouth with her hands, a ragged sob escaping her throat. My father buried his face in his hands, weeping openly. Ava, why? After everything we did to you, why would you do that? I didn't do it for you, I said honestly, my voice gentle but firm. I did it for me. I refuse to carry the guilt of watching you become homeless when I have the power to stop it. But you need to understand something very clearly. This is the end of the financial support. I am not your bank. I am not Leo's replacement. I will pay for your therapy because you both desperately need it. But from this day forward, you live on your own pensions. Of course, my father said quickly, nodding his head. We don't want your money, Ava. We just want our daughter back, even if it takes the rest of our lives to earn your trust. It might take exactly that long, I replied, but I'm willing to leave the door unlocked. It was a boundary they respected. In the months that followed, our relationship slowly began to reconstruct itself, not as a fairy tale, but as something grounded in harsh reality and immense effort. They started attending intensive counseling to unpack their toxic obsession with Leo. They downsized their lifestyle, living modestly and quietly. They never asked me for a dime. Instead, they sent me handwritten letters, small tokens of affection, and slowly, cautiously, we began to have Sunday dinners again. This time, there was no talk of startups or venture capital. There was just quiet conversation and a mutual, unspoken effort to heal. As for me, I finally stepped fully into the life I had built for myself. My career at the tech giant skyrocketed. By the end of my first year, I was leading a team of 40 engineers, pioneering advancements in autonomous robotic prosthetics. I bought a beautiful, light-filled loft overlooking the city, far away from the damp, freezing basement of my college years. One evening, I stayed late in my laboratory. The building was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the servers and the soft whirring of the robotic arm I was calibrating. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights sprawling into the distance. I thought about the dark, terrifying days leading up to my graduation. I thought about the sheer, crushing weight of my parents' dismissal and the predatory greed of my brother. But as I stood there, surrounded by the physical manifestation of my hard work and intellect, none of that pain lingered. I hadn't just survived their betrayal, I had weaponized my own resilience. I had exposed the fraud, protected my boundaries, and secured my future. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked daughter. I was the architect of my own life, and the foundation I had built was entirely, unbreakable my own.